kind of wanted to incorporate a lot of jazz speak and jazz talk to introduce the sections of this. So you're about to hear or see an original composition by Dia. All right. So I was about 5 years old when my parents realized that I have severe ADHD and I needed outlets to kind of deal with this energy that I had. And they were pretty smart to put me into just about every artistic, creative avenue after school or whatever to keep me out of trouble. And piano is something that I glommed onto quite early. So I think I'm 33 now. So I've been playing for almost close to 26, 27 years. And this has been something that I'm continuing to learn and study my whole life. And what I realized, I think, starting our company and sort of our background in design, this actually had a lot of foundation of where we are taking things today with the work that we do. And this is just a bit of an introduction of kind of some influences. So sometime in high school, I heard this song by Herbie Hancock, and I'd already studied jazz. I was interested in this at that age, but something about this specific record and this specific song was like, I really, really like doing this. It's interesting. It's, there's something about it. Should I hold this? So right there, I think I was about 16 years old, and I was like, I have to really understand jazz music. And I really cared about that. And coincidentally, the album artwork of that time period and a lot of the other musicians at that time is pretty engaging and pretty interesting stuff too. So I was resonating with the visual language of a lot of the record covers at the time. So this, I think, was a bit of a catalyst of the path that we are today. So now, as a huge philosophical thing, I think Wayne Shorter has been probably one of the biggest influences in my life, just with his, overall way of thinking, way of being, his music. It's so huge. There's something about his energy, and he's 80 years old and he's at the top of his game creatively, and that's something to be said of just what we're capable of doing as humans. And I think that's something that I aspire to and aspire to with the work that we do at our office, and has had a great influence on, I think, myself and the work. So here's a little quick reel of the work we've done in the last 2 years. So one thing that we talk about at our office a lot is output. It's literally just getting as much stuff out of us as possible. And as we see through this presentation, that's going to be kind of a philosophical theme with how we do things. It's kind of forgetting who we are and just making things. And not to say that that's a lot of work, I think, in a short period of time, but that's something that we want to just keep doing. And it's not about the work, really. I think a lot of it has to do with the learning experience of a new project and a new thing that we're trying to tackle. So let's hit the shed. That is a jazz term for practice. I'm going to talk a bit about how the process of creativity in our office that is really fundamentally kind of compared to a piano or a jazz musician's process and study. So this is something that I've been thinking about quite a bit. We have to understand our history, as a musician specifically, because we can't really fake what we play. We have to understand our classical training. We have to have actually literal dexterity to play our ideas, so we can't bypass that in any way. So our historical knowledge of music and all of that kind of theory and technique that comes out of that really puts us into our playing and our own ideas. So that kind of jumps up into your theory and technique. Now what's that? In design, that's your grids, that's your color, your typefaces, understanding that stuff. That all came out of theory, history. You have the Bauhaus, you have, fell type, all this different stuff that everybody kind of either rejected or expanded on in history and developed new things. Same thing with music. It's really parallel if you look at history. And from there, from a creative point of view, you take those, collaborate on it personally or whatever you want to do with it, and mess with them and create your own sort of point of view. But I'm at the point that it's not really original. You're really kind of taking stuff and rearranging it or repositioning it out of the stuff that happened before us. And that's okay. You know, it's like the shared concept of ideas and building on other people's work is how we kind of progress as a society creatively. And then after that, it's thinking and listening to the work and providing really good critical thinking on what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. And that's how we bring new theory and new technique into the mix. Your performance, if it's good enough, should make history, and then it repeats itself in some sort of figure eight. This is kind of an internal philosophy. I don't know if this is tried and true, but this is something that we've really thought about. So I'm going to break down each of these pretty quickly and parallel them from design and music. So the old cats. So if you guys are into jazz, we call people cats. So Mateo's kind of like a cool cat, you know. Yeah, he's old too. You know, he's getting there. I think he turned 50 last year, so that says something. All right, I'm going to run through history. So we have medieval times. We have the Gregorian chant, which is interesting because hold on one second. I got to see my notes. Pardon me. All right. Is there any way I can get this dual screen thing going on here? Sorry. So I'll talk about this. So Gregorian chants, they came up with this thing called modal playing in music, which is, you know, it kind of lays the foundation of what we do harmonically. And obviously illuminated manuscripts is one of the, you know, we can go back to Egyptians and stuff like that and talk about all of the papyrus and stuff, but we're not going to go there. But you have illuminated manuscripts, and this is actually a Gregorian chant done in that style. Then you move forward, the Renaissance, you have Thomas Tellis, who is a choir composer at the time. This is kind of a weak period in music history, but obviously Johannes Gutenberg, not a weak period in graphic design history, because that's basic. We wouldn't be here today without him. You guys should know who these people are, I hope so. And I'm going to look at my notes. Yeah. Thank you. So Bach is kind of interesting because we start thinking about jazz music and there's ornamentation and like sort of improvisation starts to begin there. And again, just sort of stacking onto each other as we're moving forward. Baskerville, we got Luke. Shoot. What's going on? Sorry. Minimize it. All right.
And then you can go up to preferences and under the system. Everybody's going to help you.
System preferences.
Don't
Okay.
turn displays.
Arrangement.
And then turn up
And
here.
turn off the mirror.
All right. Yes. No.
Category. And then play on your. No, just play it in there. No.
Wait for it. Boom. Here we are. All right. Awesome. Cool. Beethoven's pretty cool. You guys should know about him. Thinking about, he started bringing a lot of structure and harmonic stuff into music. You guys should know who Baskerville is, I hope. Bedoni kind of reminds me of Matteo a little bit. He's an idealistic, emotional figure. Might be because he's Italian. But then you have Chopin, who's kind of bringing improvisation into classical music at the time. This kind of an interesting period in history. This is when we start to separate a little bit. You have Art Nouveau, you have Impressionists. They're similar in a way. But Debussy has got a huge influence on jazz, and you'll see how these things kind of separate and connect as I go through the next 50 years or so. Mucha obviously does some very decorative, beautiful, illustrative stuff. If you guys don't know who Peter Behrens is, he's kind of the transition into the Bauhaus. So you have this kind of removement of ornament happening here, and then you have Jelly Roll Morton. This is when we start to see jazz. So if you think about, if you heard of stride piano, like ragtime, this is kind of where that begins. It's in New Orleans at the time. So you have, it's like, sorry, I'm not playing it right. So this whole style, we're going back and forth. So that's Jelly Roll, and he brings that kind of bluesy sort of New Orleans touch into it. Then we go into Herbert Baer. Obviously, we're in the Bauhaus now. Funny because these guys are like the same age. And this stuff's going on in Germany, and then you have this stuff going on in New Orleans. So you have these artistic movements in design, both in music, happening simultaneously, totally different from each other. Very expressive, very emotional driven from the music side, but I think what's happened out of Art Nouveau and design, you get this, oh, our stuff serves a function, so we have to think about this less artistically and more practically, and that's when you get stuff happening in the Bauhaus. And then you get sort of the refinement of that with the international style. Emil Reuter is a good example. Charlie Parker, if you're a jazz musician today, this is the most important figure you need to study, because he really is, I think, embodied the language of a jazz musician. The improvisation style comes straight out of him. So depending on what your preference is from a design standpoint, personally in our studio comes from more of a modernist sort of Bauhaus tradition, but if you think about these two figures, they really lay the foundation for what we do creatively in design and what jazz in general, if you're doing jazz music, you have to really understand bebop very well. So at this same time period, like these are people that we have to study intensely because they give that kind of structure. And now, this is postmodernism. Like, so we have all this stuff before us that I showed you. And you have Wolfgang Weingart. I mean, Miles Davis is a bit older, but he kind of seems like a younger figure because he constantly changed and evolved. And Wolfgang obviously destroyed and kind of pieced out all of the Swiss style and the Bauhaus style and created something a bit more, I think, emotional about it. I think this is when you get this kind of jazzy sort of design feel. You know, I think Nicholas Troxler is a good example that comes out of this kind of thinking. And I think this is a really interesting territory because you have history, fundamentals that come out of these stages, but then now we're kind of destructing it, destroying it, adding it, twisting it, manipulating it, both musically and in design. And I think that's really kind of cool. So it's an interesting Wayne Shorter quote. So what are you, a musician? Like, okay, I'm a jazz musician. I'm not just playing jazz music. I have to know all the music to be able to have a point of view of what I'm going to play. So that's the same thing with design. It's kind of a set of like what's the word? I can't think of it. But you know, you have to know a volume of music or songs or styles to be able to do certain things. And this is why it's very important to understand the historical context of what we do as a designer or as a musician, because these all come from certain things. And even specifically, if you guys know anything about Marxist art history and the understanding of culture, if I decide to use Futura, for example, in a poster, that has connotations of a period of time that I may or may not want to suggest in the work. So you really have to think about the decisions that you're doing with the certain things. And when you understand them well enough, you can start to twist those and change those and make new things out of it. And I think that's a kind of a cool and interesting thing to do when you understand that context. So chops, all right, history's over. You guys can yawn, it's kind of boring stuff, but I think it's kind of cool. So now we got to practice. Like, now we got to put all this stuff, all the history in our hands and do stuff with it. Kind of funny that music theory and design theory kind of oddly look similar. So if I'm learning music or trying to learn piano, I have to understand certain chords. I under like the C note. So that's there. Or I need a C chord. I have to learn all this. A C major 7. C major 9. So all these things, and I have to play every other key and learn all these different arrangements of the notes. You see that here. Same thing with typography. Same thing with understanding grids. We really should understand the little things so we can create the big things out of it, you know, and practice that. So if I'm practicing chords or scales, there's a certain amount of dexterity that you have to achieve to pull off these ideas. You cannot get by it in music. I think as designers we can fake it a little bit, but let's try not to do that. Let's go through there and do these repetitions and iterations to pull this off. Thank you. Just specifically, if you look at some of the relationships of music and design, you know, you think about pitch, color, shape, texture, space, form. These things are actually pretty parallel to each other. You know, like if I'm going to play, let's think about color, for example. So think about blue. Let's think about like pink.
think about like an orange.
So what I'm doing is I'm addressing kind of a visual relationship to how the emotional response out of this that feels. So pink or a brighter color is more uplifting. So I played a space here, kind of chord structure. Minor keys give you blue, darker notes. So like you have this relationship of how we approach the instrument and with how we approach the actual design. I want to break one thing down because I think this is pretty cool. There's this idea of time signature in grid systems. Again, I talked about coming out of a Swiss-style Bauhaus thinking, so I like the structure. We need this structure as music. So I'm going to make you guys clap, if you don't mind, after me. So we're in 6/4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Cool. So think about how that sways. You get this kind of swaying feel back and forth. Think about it like a boat. So now, if you heard of the song Take 5, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or break it up. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So now think about the grid structure there. You have an kind of a off-balance grid. You have 3 on one side, 2 on one side. If you're going to set type, you can kind of decide where that stuff lands. This is exactly like, you know, we would say syncopation or something like that, where you're landing your beat in a certain way. 4/4, this is your typical song. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. And, you know, think of the type of, like, syncopation. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4. I put accent 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm dropping the type in the third column. So you're getting, you're shifting balance of the page. You're dealing with space and time visually. And, you know, I think you guys have. It's a horrible version of my favorite things. But think about, it's a waltz. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. So that swaying of a 6/4 is the same as 3/4, but it's much faster. Same thing, if you look at the page, you get that kind of visual feel of time. So I want to talk about like style guiding the music, for example. And I think this is something we think about creatively in our office quite a bit, is that we kind of are with the philosophy that a logo is kind of a pointless being. Like we really, the sum of its parts really makes everything make sense. So I'm going to play a little song that breaks this down. I'm going to play the melody, I'm going to then bring the bass into it, then I'm going to bring the chord structure into it. And you're going to see that it might not sound good until I bring all the elements together. The melody itself doesn't really work without the rest of it. And I'm going to play it out of time too, so it's just going to sound really bad out the gate. So that's just me playing a melody without time signature or anything. Now I'm going to add time to it. Still doesn't really make any sense yet. So I'm going to bring the bass. I'm going to play it with chords. that song doesn't work until I bring the context to it. So when we think about identity systems, it's the same. I think some people, this is an argument, I think, but to us, it really, all the pieces have to be in accord to really make sense. And I think what's really cool, if you set enough foundation there, you can improvise on it, and you can make it weird or twist it and mess it up, but if you have the foundation there, it works. So I'm going to talk about practice and performance. I think they're kind of the same thing, but this is kind of a more philosophical discussion. I'm going to talk about practice more as a technical thing. All right. So most of you guys have probably tried to bench press before? Maybe. Those who have and that haven't like broken their arms, you realize that it takes a level of concentration to not have that thing fall on your chest. You can't worry about like, oh, is this cool or not? Am I looking cool? Am I sweating in front of this girl working out next to me? You can't worry about that stuff. You have to really focus on that actual activity. And this is a very difficult thing to do, but it's very important that we just sit there and rep and get really one with the activity and not think about it being right or wrong or cool or not cool. And this is how you really can generate a lot of like creative ideas and output. And just iteration. So hey, I'm going to try it with lowercase, 1 uppercase, 2 uppercase, 3 uppercase. Literally exhausting your options and ideas in recording that. And I think in our studio, I mean, it's kind of crazy. And you're going to see it in the next slide. We'll have 200-300 versions of layout before we necessarily decide on one that's powerful. And we don't spend much time with it. We just get it out, get it out, get it out, get it out. We don't think about it. We're not worried about where it sits. Because then we have the volume of stuff to look at. Then we can decide what's effective visually. We don't really know what's effective visually when we're working on it. And I think we've all been there. We try to push it around on a page and then try to make it work. It doesn't work like that. We need to sit and reflect and come back to the work to make it make sense. So I'm going to show you this project a little later. This is kind of some iteration on a visual system of an identity that we're working on. Few options, but it's fun. I mean, you just get this stuff out, and then by the end of the day, you look at your folder, you have 60 options in there, and you're like, wow, I actually did a lot. And I think this is very important, at least the way we work. It's not very prescriptive. Hey, put this there, put this there. It's like, hey, maybe try this, check this out, try this, maybe check this out. And then by the time you do 10 iterations on that idea, then you get stuck on that. And I think internally what's important is being able to separate yourself from the work enough where you don't care if someone else works on it. So it's like, hey, I like what you're doing there. Let me run with that idea a little bit. So the collective attitude really starts to build on each other. And I think that's what I'm talking about here. Ensemble starts to come to life. And ensemble in music is a very important concept. It's becoming one unit with the amount of people. I know you guys are probably going to be uncomfortable with this. I'm going to make you sing one note. All together. Oop, here you go. Let's all sing this. C. Keep singing it. C. Yes. So right there, there's 40, 50 people in here. The energy behind that note was so much more powerful, but it was just the one note. We focused on that one thing together as a team or unit. I talk about this. 4 people, you have 4 designers in the studio doing their own thing, not talking to each other, that equals 4. When you have 4 people working together, you have exponentially, that equals 256. I believe that, like it's exponentially what you're capable of doing when you work with people and a very selfless team. And this is hard. This is really hard to do, to be like, oh man, I don't like that. I don't like what he's thinking. You gotta get rid of that and just be really focused on, especially if we're doing design, we're not working on our fine art projects. This is usually for a client. Let's just try to make the work as best as possible and not really worry about how we feel about it. And I think that's important to think about. All right. So that leads me into performance. Let's count it off. I'm going to talk about this a lot. We don't care how we look or how we feel or what we think about it. So there's Chick Corea, Brian Blade in the middle, and Keith Jarrett. All probably some of the greatest musicians in history. They look kind of funky right now. Like, let's be honest. But like, think about that again. Like, these guys are so into what they're doing at that point in time. They don't give a shit what you think. In fact, they don't think about it like that. They're so into the instrument that however they look or however they feel is gone. That's right there, right in time with that moment. And I'm going to show you about a solo from Wayne Shorter's band after this that blows my mind every time I see it, because it shows the power and collective sort of energy happening together. And remember, this guy's 80, so it's very impressive. I don't know if you guys could turn it up a little bit. That's basically being in that place at its pinnacle. Like, they are pushing energy and boundaries with that music as far as they possibly can go. And I know it's a bit different, we're talking about music, but if you think about the design process and if you put that energy and focus on what you do, I think you can get there. If you forget about what's going on around you and you put that intention, yeah, well. Charlie Parker quote kind of puts it together. That kind of sums up all the stuff I just talked about. Master your instrument, master music, and forget all that shit and just play it. So if you get to the point where you understand stuff so well and you can just do what they were just doing in that band, like it's intrinsic in you. You have all the skill sets, it's all there, and you're kind of destroying that too. But you're doing it with a power and conviction and energy that's when you kind of tap into that like emotional response. I'm going to quickly talk about criticism really quick. We call it vibing music. Give people a hard time, like, hey, why'd you play that, man? Talk about options. You have to have enough options to compare stuff. Drives me mad when a designer is like, hey, check this out, I have 2 things to look at. I'm like, I need more to have a proper discussion about. But I think we know that. Talking about what, how, and why we got there. And again, I keep talking about this Detach. It's about the work. It's not about how you feel about it necessarily. Just try to get that work pushed really hard. And I like suggestive versus prescriptive. I think it's a very constructive way of providing a path of direction and work. So that kind of sums up that section and how that all works. All right, this is a bit more of an abstract discussion about effort, intention, and conviction. Now, when conviction, it's like you really meant to do that. So, and this is where you can start to break rules and do things that kind of will be more polarizing to the viewer or the listener, depending on how you approach that. This is funny. This is my high school piano teacher, and I remember I was learning how to do certain things, and I was asking about how this guy plays. So he's like, hey, it's really not a mistake if you play with conviction. So if you meant to do it, no one can tell you that it's wrong. They might just not like it, but it's not wrong. So there really isn't any rules at the end of the day. But, you know, if you know all the skill and history, you should be able to do it really well. Kind of threw that in there as a curveball. this is where we start to tap into that kind of subliminal level of work. You get that soulfulness, that energy. It happens when we start to make mistakes or alter certain things with a very intelligent intention behind why we do that. It's not sloppy. It's really done with a lot of skill. I'm going to do a little demo on the keyboard and talk about the idea of tension and release. This is how we do it musically. It's very important that we have a grounding foundation of what the listener expects, and then now we know that we can break that. That was kind of a haphazard little thing, but what I was doing is setting our expectations to understand that I'm going to play like a bluesy note. And that's going to stay there. And then I decided to do stuff that wasn't so bluesy. Like. Always then coming back home to resolve that. So what that does is build anxiety, stress, and tension in the ear. And I think the same thing can be done with visual and design. I think we've all been tapping with this stuff. I think you see there's some work with Mueller-Brockman, actually some new stuff. Hubert and Fisher, this little composition, the pink one, I absolutely love it, the way the type's just stuck there in this tiny little set. But these are all like very much masters of what they do, doing things that are a bit altered or a bit different. And this is polarizing work. People hate it or love it. I like polarizing things because that's when you remember the work. Whether you hate it or like it, it's not like, oh, that was nice. I don't like that was like, oh, it's a soft breath. Like, hey, that was really nice work. It's really safe. No, it's important to tap into this kind of stuff. And we get into branding and things like that. It gets a little harder to pull this kind of stuff off. But this is something that artistically we can try to achieve doing design. So I'd say this. Visceral connections are made when we shatter our audience expectations through an informed and honest display of creativity. So we're not faking it or ripping somebody off. We just do it because we've informed ourselves through history and skill that we can pull this off with a level of confidence. All right. Wow, we're at the work. We're moving pretty good. So, got a few case studies. I'm not going to go on and on about that because it's not really the point of this. I think you can go to the website or see that really fast reel I sent at the beginning. Greg Sorensen, this project's kind of interesting because this kind of is visual translation of a lot of the subject matter I'm talking about, music. There's a system and there's a logo. This all stuff works together that it can't be separated from each other. And I'm going to talk about the creative process of getting there a little bit. This kind of pulling back the curtain of our studio, so to speak, and how we get to certain things. And this is what we do it. I mean, if you guys feel this is kind of an interesting thing to do, it's up to you. This is how we do things. So the first thing, we get a project, we have to understand the subject matter to its end. Like, we read about it, understand it, look at visual cues. This is a day or two of just pure visual research. And we talk about conceptual research. So visual concepts come out of the subject matter that we're trying to design to. Whether it's an artist, we understand their art and what it looks like or what their philosophy is. We need to have a reason why we make these decisions. Whether, if you're doing something more nostalgic, for example, if it's like a restaurant, you got to think about the period of time. What's the chef trying to do with his food? We have to make these correlations and draw them together to make the design I think, conceptually powerful. That's what really connects, I think, people to like what it is. They don't really care what typeface you do at the end of the day, but like if it feels right and it feels like puts them in that place or it makes sense from an idea, that's what connects the audience to the design from beyond graphic designers. Graphic designers care about the noodly details, but the real audience cares about the idea. And now talk about iteration. So if you saw the camera stuff and lenses, that's just a little like clipping of like a folder. So, oh shit. Just reps, talking about pumping it up. Like, just get as much out as you can. Every, like, oh, to the left, to the right, we'll try it there, try it there. This is the point, we're not looking at the work thinking about how it looks. This is like in the flow of just making things. And once we finish this process, sleep on it, come to the next day, then we look at that work and what hits us? Like, what do we feel good about it? What's the strongest sort of impact? So what came out of this was a very reductive system based on the f-stop marks on a lens. And we placed them in a way that gave them a sense of dimension, but it's still flat. And then, just to pay it off, we animated it in a way where you're reflecting the actual action of focusing a camera. So not only did we use just the lines to kind of connote that concept, we could bring an animated kind of, to make it even more powerful, I think, to drive that home. I don't know if it's playing. Yeah, there it is. So, okay, we have that. Okay, what are we going to do with this thing? Well, let's turn it into the entire grid system. So everything we do is abiding by this conceptual sort of grid system layout that all comes back to that logo in a certain way. Simple, very reductive, but creates a nice sort of strange energy with the page. It worked. Sometimes this stuff doesn't really work very well. Even down to how we lay out a letterhead. Like, and people kind of discount these kind of secondary pieces in design. Don't. Like, I think the email signature is as important as the main stuff. Like, you have top to bottom, everything you do, you have to go at it with like a wholehearted intensity. Because that's how, you can kind of tell in projects, oh, that logo is great, but then the other stuff kind of like, the designer got lazy. But if you pay attention to these things, I think this is where the magic happens and the kind of the lower hanging fruit, because that means that people really cared about the work. So this finished stuff, it all kind of syncs up in a weird place, but kind of works. Business cards. So you can see that we've reduced the layouts down to where the type's being set. And also what's interesting with this, you can kind of remove or add lines as it expands. So it becomes, so to speak, responsive. Front of the book side where it's laid out. There's some other fun stuff. This is cool. Now, just a little background. We came through design in a very kind of different way than I think a lot of other studios. Our background is pretty heavy in film and motion graphics, so the understanding of animation is very important to how we approach the work. So this shows the system and how we just kind of cut a reel of the work together, and then we use this animated as a transition piece, so it's kind of cool. So that's kind of bringing it to life through motion. There's a whole other subject matter within that piece itself. of the discussion of music and emotion when it comes through actual animation. If you notice the edits hit certain time, and how even if you saw the last piece kind of snap to the beat. Now, that's a totally different subject. I could probably have another hour discussion on that alone. But also just shows the influence of music, especially in like the animated space. This is a project that hasn't been released yet. Now that was more the grid structure or the time signature visual aspect of our brand identity. Now I'm going to talk about the color or that kind of emotional feel we get out of that. So this project is a co-working space. It's opening actually in a month in a big space in financial district called Primary. And we developed an identity system entirely off of color therapy. So, we did research from psychology, read a lot of books, got online, just dug deep on this subject and what colors inspires certain moods and feelings. And this is very important for this client because it's all about wellness in work. And it's not necessarily just like, hey, I'm going to WeWork to grind it out with my tech bros. This is like more about a space where we can go to yoga class and chill, have some good, quality food and things like that. So the experience of life is very important in this space for the client. So we're currently working on this, but we've developed a generative visual system that kind of expands from these different colors. And I'm going to go through this and talk about it, what each color sort of signifies. But what this does, let's see, play that again. Oops. So what this does is gives us opportunity to render out stills of this in infinite ways, so then that can be applied to specific collateral in the space or website or whatever it's going to be. So this is kind of the logo itself. It's just a sphere with colors. So we have calm, we got energy, appetite, health, meditative, productivity, social. So you think about this and then like, oh, I need a social-driven color circle for this event that we're having. Render out that, it gets applied to the actual designs itself. So it's kind of an interesting take on how mood is actually the identity here. The color sort of shapes the identity. So here's some of the pieces of collateral, posters. Very airy, very negative space, very kind of light. We're actually, it's not built out yet, and we'll see some renderings through this, but how is this going to work in the space? Even in the interactive experience. I think this is actually one of my favorite slides because we see it actually used functionally in a calendar system. So we're applying specific color spheres to a class. And then when you see that together, it actually kind of gives a nice colorful feel in a very minimal way. And works into social icons. We even do like mix series and stuff. So we're applying that feel to all that stuff. And actually we're working on scent, so even thinking about aromatherapy and how it applies to color therapy. So it becomes this very intense concept just around how it makes you feel. So these are some renderings, kind of cool. And they say it'll be ready in a month. I think maybe 2, but I'm pretty excited to see this come to life. All right. So that was very client-facing stuff. That's our day-to-day, what we're working on at DIA. Now, when we have downtime, we are doing a lot of other things, and it's very important. And I talk about education a lot, but I think if we aren't trying to drive new skills into our bucket of things that we can do with work, whether it's studying history or applying, theory and dexterity into our skill set, then we kind of become stagnant. So I think in the last 2 years, I don't know if Mateo's too stoked about it. But I've taken on type design, and I think there's like, oh man, I don't know why he decided to do that. But personally, have tried to study that and figure that out, and luckily Mateo's actually helped me out a tremendous amount in getting the skills fair today. But now internally, we're all working on that together. So the designers in our team are getting in there and understanding letter forms at a nuanced level. And whether they decided to do a typeface of works doesn't matter. I think what you do with the practice of this subject is that it makes your eye really, really good in nuance. You see subtlety that you wouldn't see, and this is something that constantly improves, and your taste gets better through these exercises. And it's a lot, but I'm just going to run through this. This is Banana Grotesque. This is one actually we're doing for a client right now, rebranding this Bespoke Digital. They do our production company. This is one that we actually did for a client, but didn't end up going this direction, so we might actually blow it out into full typeface. Some other fun stuff. Yeah. It's the last one. So these are all like, some of them are more along the others. The first one, actually, I've set the entire presentation in, so that's got a bit more finish to it. It still needs a lot of work. But some of these other stuff are sketches and potential ideas that we could apply for branding projects or different things like that. And if we think they're strong enough, then we might spend the time to finish them and release them, hopefully, which gets me to another thing I'll talk about later. And then also, you get these opportunities to do posters for exhibitions and things like that. So this is a time where we can do that middle area, you know, bring the soulfulness into design more from the artistic side. And here's some pieces, the poster for this event. There's a fun poster series about what our name really means. So it could mean dizzy, intoxicated ants. If you look closely, there's a bunch of drunk ants falling all over the poster. That's a Comic Sans for Cancer poster on the right side. So I turned Comic Sans into cancer into the poster. I thought it was interesting. So, you know, and there's a few other cool things. It's our internal take on what social media is on the right side. Sorry for the pessimistic view on it. And just a few other things that we've been working on. And here's a few other recent projects that we've just released. So that's the work. I want to talk a few philosophical matters. We finish up and have questions. So for the encore, hopefully this isn't too heavy. All right. I really care about learning and education. I know we have clients, we got to make money, we got to pay rent, but like, what's the point? So to me, learning as much stuff as possible and soaking in as much as possible, and not to say an example, it's like you can really do a lot if you put a lot of effort into it. Like, you know, whether it's learning music, and I was talking to Carol earlier, it's like, it doesn't matter how old you are. Like, you look at Wayne Shorter, who's 80 years old, that's at the top of his game. Like, just being hungry to like soak up as much as possible. And not giving up the quest. And I also believe we never become like masters. Like, oh, I'm so good, I'm done. Because at that point, like, what's the point again? It's like, well, why am I here necessarily? So I think as you get older in your experience, it becomes sort of, you get into this mentor/student relationship with people. When you learn from each other and can continue to grow. And I think that's, at our studio, education is so important. And pushing ourselves internally to make the work as best as we possible, because it does spiral back into the work. It makes the work better at the end of the day. It benefits everybody and the clients. Miles Davis, what's the matter? Are you scared? Are you scared to take on that journey? I know when I started Design Type, you get that kind of feeling of overwhelming, like, holy shit, this is way too much. I can't believe I'm going to try to do this. And I like that feeling a little bit, because it puts you in, you know, you like looking at the Grand Canyon and you get the chills, like, this is a little much. But like, if you take that energy and turn it around, it's like, you know, I'm going to take this on and break it down piece by piece. So like, it's important not to see the big picture. You have to just chip it away at little things. And then over time, you just keep learning more and more about that subject. It's kind of funny. The deeper you go into something, the bigger it becomes. And that's what's cool about jazz, is that for me, I sit down at this instrument. I never play the same thing like twice. I play in a different time signature. Like, every time I sit down an instrument, it's a different experience for me. Same thing with design, same thing with type. There's always something new that I have to understand or learn about that. And I think personally, why I glommed onto these subject matters is that they offer that for myself and I think our studio, that level of, you know, like overwhelming depth that you can never master this. It always stays interesting for you. So I talk about this. Also, I talk about this selflessness ego thing. And this is a really hard thing to do, but try very hard. Like, when I talk about even doing reps, like getting that zone of just pure focus, you do forget what you think or who you are at that point in time. You're very focused on your output and your creativity. When you start to think, oh man, this isn't cool, or like, it doesn't look like that, that's your ego talking, like, oh yeah, you know, I'm too cool to try that. It makes me out of comfort zone. So I deliberately pick those pictures, those faces, because it tests your ego, like, oh, that's kind of goofy or like silly. And I laugh because I think it's funny. And I know people have seen me play or taken pictures of me, and I see my face, I'm like, wow, I really look like that. But try to suppress that. And I think that's a very important thing to do. And I think beyond just the creativity, just in general, and I think it kind of changes how you look at just creative output and like human life in general. I think is cool. Kind of heavy. I'm super into astrophysics and this stuff too, because again, it's like just vast and like intense, heavy. But think about it. Like tomorrow, something could happen, and then I feel like, man, I didn't put my honest effort in everything I did today. So if I approach my work or my life like that, then everything's going to be more intense. And it's going to be driven and heavy and hard and that's where the real connection happens, I think, with work. And I'll watch that Wayne Shorter clip over and over again because that just shows the level of where you can take things with what we can do. This is interesting. People aren't going to like when you do this. Like they're going to test you or challenge you and give you a hard time. Or thinking about looking at the Grand Canyon and trying to design a typeface, like that feeling you get. But this is kind of an interesting thing to think about. Resistance is what an airplane needs to take off. So an airplane doesn't fly without that pushback. You need that to kind of drive you and push you. And I think at a certain point you come at it so hard that you do like take off, and all of a sudden you punch through a new level of creativity. And I find this personally with playing piano and design or whatever. You look at what your work was a year ago, and someone came to our office, a couple weeks, and they're like, "Hey, are any of these posters or the work in the office your studios?" And I was like, "Absolutely not," because if I saw that work or I idolized that work in my office, then I think it's great. No, I look at work that we've done 6 months ago, a year ago, and I see so much improvement that needs to be made on it, but I can't like attach that. I have to apply that same kind of energy in what moves forward. So I'd rather be inspired by the others around me, and that I think that helps you push against that resistance and move forward. And I think on top of that, finding people that you trust and have respect for and connect with them to push you farther. Like I was saying earlier, Mateo's taken my type skills tenfold in a short period of time, and tell you he'll make sexual references to the letter A, and I'm like, okay. So then I soak it in and I sit with it, and I'm like, he's got a point. It does look like a dangling banana. It's fine. And I said that was the point. So, but you find people that help push you and put you out of your comfort zone, and you take their feedback, and I think a lot of growth happens there. Thank you. I got special thanks to Tiana Esperanza and Meg Donahoe, my business partners. Thank you, Roberto, and thank you, Carol, and everybody at TDC. And thank you guys for coming in. And I'm curious if you guys have any questions. And I think we have like 6 posters around or something. So if you guys even want them, fine. If not, I don't care. But cool. All right.
I have a question. Mitch,
Yes.
how much do you pay us for the posters
How much did I pay you?
to get the poster?
I don't know. $5 or something?
Okay.
All right. I don't know. All right. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions, concerns, comments? Are you out of your mind? No? A lot of people staring at me right now. Nothing to say.
I just loved what you were talking about with time signatures and grids. It's not something I thought of before, and it was kind of blowing my mind.
Cool. Thank you.
So thanks for that. I have to disagree a little bit about the ego, because there is this saying that the ego makes a wonderful servant and a terrible master. So I think the ego is actually technically the thing that makes you never satisfied with something. And so if you can harness that to continue to make things rather than destroying it altogether, I think, that is the thing that kind of drives us. So I wouldn't destroy it altogether.
Yeah. I think it's dealing with it in a positive way.
Sure.
Like, we can't get rid of it. Like, it's impossible. Like, to literally say, like, I forget who I am, I'm just going to make, can't do it. But yeah, I think that's a driving force, and that kind of catches you sometimes. But I think for myself and our studio, it's kind of like, I know we can't achieve this, but if we think like this and detach from what we're doing, then therefore we can make without criticism. And I think it's more of just a way of approaching things. But yeah, I think we're on the same page with different approach. Yeah.
Same thing.
The reps you were talking about, I don't know if you work off a creative brief, but are you doing that to solve a problem? or are you doing it just to do something that hasn't been done before?
So it's an interesting question because brand identity work is an odd beast because as a graphic designer you want to push the envelope from a design standpoint, but also you need to make sure that you're conceptually and dealing with the business problem. So the reps is us, and there's a weird middle ground of there needs to be a level of creativity, intensity with the work that makes the work memorable to the audience that is going to deal with this and solve the business problem at the same time. So there's two reps happening. There's conceptual reps. So that's like the Greg SORENSEN thing. We came up with the little lines or whatever. We do things like that. So that's tied to the concept of the brief. Now, layouts and things like that, that's just us internally. We're not going to be satisfied with work unless it feels and has the proper like subliminal quality to it before we present it. And that's just us doing design to make sure that it has that tension and visual language. And also, you know, at the end of the day, you can style guide that and, you know, it becomes very systematic. So it's a weird middle ground of like pushing creativity into the brand work, but not letting it be about that. It's still about like the concept and problem at hand, you know, colors and typefaces and things like that. But yeah, cool. Go behind.
What made you go to design?
It's funny. When I talk about that little, when I was 5 or 10, that picture. The other things that my parents put me in were, I was in choir, I was in drawing lessons, painting, everything, like acting. Even I got stuck in musical, and I hated it, but I did it, and I came in there. I was like, you know, I'm going to do this, and then I ended up. It was Schoolhouse Rock, dude. And I got the lead role, and I'm like, I didn't really sign up for this. So that experience of like sampling all these creative outlets drove me into a place where I was like, how do I marry music and how do I marry design some way? This has always been a problem that I've been trying to figure out my entire career and lifetime, really, even when I was in high school. I was like, I can do these two things, how do I bring it together? So that's why we got into motion graphics and film early. So the DIA 1.0 isn't this. That's doing commercials for ad agencies and animation, and like it's similar to like a Buck or a Brand New School, studios that focus on the production stuff. So that founded what we, and then we like, I think one day Meg and I were talking, we're like, you know, this is not what we want to be doing. Something's not right here. We like it, we understand this, we can animate, but like we really are interested in the brand work. So I think what got me in design at the end of the day was like, oh, there's a functional purpose and a career path that I can somehow fold these creative outlets into. And then naturally the music stuff was there, but it started to come to life over time.
How many people you have in your studio?
They're all here. 3. Right now.
And do you play together?
Play music together? No, it's not a lot of music playing. No. Well, yeah. It's kind of weird. Like, you know what? I'm going to go down and play some blues for the crew. No, so part of the background of our studio, we set it up like a production company. So if you are familiar with working in companies like that, you subtract and add on a project basis. So we have a core team that's always there, and then if we need like specialists in something, then we bring them in for freelance. And I think it's important that we stay a certain size to maintain this philosophical point of view. And it's hard. We've had a lot of problems. Like it's very hard to adopt this mentality because it kind of at odds is like the designer comes in, I want to make my statement, and then you come into this place. It's like I don't care who you are, but you're very talented. I do care who you are, you know, but I don't care about like you're coming part of the collective whole here. And that's a very difficult transition for a lot of designers to make. But I do think the trade-off is the amount of education and learning that happens there. And if they want to part their ways in future, do their thing, it's great. But it's like a very hotbed of learning. But yeah, there's not a lot of jamming. Maybe after I'm by myself working on something late, I'll go play. My wife and business partner will. She's like, I'll stay late, and she's like, why did you stay home? Like, why did you stay so late? And I was like, oh, I didn't get anything done. She knows why I didn't get anything done because I was sitting there all night going, oh yeah, I'm gonna jam, you know. I could do this for hours. You know, so that's, you know, I constantly like am drawn to the keyboard. But yeah. Anything else? Anybody?
When you're bringing the lawsuit against the sexual harassment against the
It's not yet.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, we do play music together sometime. We were just joking. If I do show up at his house and he's not wearing proper outfit, then we might be in a problem. But so far, so good. Luckily, I think his kids and family have been around. So cool. Well, if there's no more questions,
Yeah,
thank
there's a
you.
question here.
Oh,
Do you find sometimes you get your best ideas when you, graphically when you're playing music? Because your mind wanders into different places?
what happens is it doesn't necessarily happen then. It's usually after I'll play or I was just focused on something else, and oddly, like late, like 12, 1 a.m., you're in that point where I should be falling asleep, but your mind's racing. It all kind of molds together in a weird way. But this does have a tremendous effect on the visual aspect. I think you see that in those two projects, that there is this weird musical quality in the work. But yeah, I don't really know when the ideas come through the rep activity, and that's when the cool stuff happens. I think it's really that. I think that's my favorite part, is especially working with other designers, and then they're like, man, I hate everything I'm doing, and then I'm like, you have like 70 artboards open, and I'm like, that, and that is awesome, and they don't know because they're so close, and that's kind of the perfect separation of the work. It's like when you get these fresh set of eyes on something, and then you're like, ooh, that's weird and that's off. Let's mess with that, and I think that's when the real ideas start to come to life. Cool. All right. Well, thank you.
Very much.